the big light bulb moments that I had is that Western civilization spends a lot of time shopping. It's become like a recreational activity. People that I met along my travels were kind of confounded by that idea that like you would just go shopping as entertainment as opposed to just buying something to replace something or because you really need it.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and today's episode is packed with practical tips and inspiring insights on decluttering and organizing your home. Joining me is renowned home organizing expert and best-selling author, Shira Gill. With 15 years of experience, Shira has developed a straightforward 4-step organizing process that can transform any space, no matter its size. In our conversation, we delve into the importance of reducing volume before organizing and how to tackle even the tiniest of spaces without feeling overwhelmed. Plus, Shira shares her wisdom on leading a minimalist lifestyle and how intentional living can create freedom and simplicity in all areas of your life. Stick around to learn Shira's proven 4-step process that you can start using today to declutter and organize your space like a professional. But before we get started, did you know that I personally send Tiny House newsletter every week on Tuesdays? It's called Tiny Tuesdays, and it's a weekly email with Tiny House news, interviews, photos, and resources. It's free to subscribe, and I even share sneak peeks of things that are coming up, ask for feedback about upcoming podcast guests, and more. It's really the best place to keep a pulse on what I'm doing in the tiny house space and also stay informed of what's going on in the tiny house movement. To sign up, go to thetinyhouse.net/newsletter, where you can sign up for the Tiny Tuesdays newsletter. And of course, you can unsubscribe at any time. I will never send you spam. And if you ever don't want to receive emails, it's easy to unsubscribe. So again, that's thetinyhouse.net/newsletter. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's Tiny Tuesdays newsletter. With Shira Gill. Shira is a globally recognized home organizing expert and best-selling author with a minimalist philosophy. She has inspired thousands of people to clear clutter from their homes and lives and developed a process and toolkit that applies to anyone, regardless of budget, space, or lifestyle. Shira, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
Great. Yeah, great to have you. So you've written several books on organizing and minimalism, and I'm curious how you think these principles apply specifically to tiny house living or to living smaller than you were?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been a professional organizer for about 15 years. I pivoted into writing primarily about 3 years ago, but I've been in every type of home you can imagine, from homes that take up entire city blocks to the tiniest home you can imagine, like 300 square feet. Mm-hmm. And what I've seen is, across the board universally, most people just have too much stuff and more volume than they can successfully manage. I think when you choose to have a tiny home and live smaller, you are forced in a way to reckon with what you own and what you value in a way that people with larger homes often aren't forced to do. They have to opt in. And in an interesting way, the people that I've worked with who are intentionally downsizing, it's much easier for them to make decisions than people in a larger home who can often get paralyzed because they have the space. Yeah. So they have to really make a decision. Well, this thing might be nice or might be functional, but I don't want it even though I have the room to store it. For those small space dwellers, it really comes down to being forced to examine in a much deeper way at the end of the day, what do you really need for your quality of life and what do you value?
Yeah, that's great. And you've also traveled kind of globally and studied organized homes, which I think it's refreshing to hear because there are just so many different ways to approach minimalism and organizing. And so I'm curious, what were some surprising or like counterintuitive strategies that you discovered that you think could benefit, small living?
Yeah. I mean, so I for my second book, Organized Living, I really went on this kind of world tour, meeting 25 of the top organizing experts across the globe and touring their homes. And I had, one organizer lived in an Airstream trailer with her husband, and they had downsized from, a 5,000 square foot home, and she had 200 pairs of shoes.
Mm.
And then I had people who were like a family of 5 or 6 living in a, sprawling suburban home, and everything in between. And what I noticed, I mean, for me, the biggest surprises were just the cultural differences
Mm.
between homes and kind of perspectives. People that I met in cities like Mexico City or Lisbon or Stockholm, or even Paris had such a different way of thinking about their things. And, I think one of the big light bulb moments that I had is that Americans, or more like a Western civilization, is really spends a lot of time shopping.
Yeah.
And it's become like a recreational activity, as opposed to the organizers and just people that I met along my travels were kind of confounded by that idea that like you would just go shopping as entertainment, as opposed
Mm.
to just buying something to replace something or because you really need it. And so the organizers that I met essentially outside of the US and Canada, it was much harder for them to get organizing clients because the people that they lived among already weren't drowning in stuff the way the Americans and even the Canadian communities were. So that was kind of one of the big things, was just
That's fascinating.
behaviorally, like people in other countries are not shopping all the time for fun
Come
to
to
keep up with
America,
the
the land of
Joneses. Yeah,
opportunities for
the
professional
land of,
organizers.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It is. I mean, and like it's funny because I had so many organizers in California, where I am based,
Hmm.
who literally can't keep up with the demand. It's like everyone needs an organizer, has an organizer, is looking for an organizer. Whereas, when I went to Stockholm or Lisbon or Mexico City, the organizers there said they had a really hard time finding clients because people really weren't drowning in volume in the same way. And so my big light bulb moment doing this book was that what most people are struggling with is not an organizing problem, but a volume problem.
Mm.
And that organizing is actually quite simple. It's just the process of grouping similar things together.
Yeah.
Whereas volume and kind of distilling down to the essentials, what's difficult for people is making decisions. And so organizers really, in a way, become coaches and therapists much more so than organizers, because the bulk of our work is helping people make decisions about what to keep, what to get rid of, how to dispose of the unwanted things responsibly. And so it was less like, oh, here's this organizing hack, and
Mm.
more what everyone needs is just less stuff, to be really simplistic about it.
I've been reading a lot about anxiety lately, and just hearing you talk about that, I had a light bulb moment connecting. Like, I think that for a lot of people, having too much volume and shopping and all that stuff is a way, I think, that we try to deal with our anxiety. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. 1,000,000%. And to the point where, I'm 15 years into this career, but a few years in, I started realizing that every one of my clients, who are just like normal individuals and families, high functioning, were dealing with some sort of hole in their lives that were
Mm.
causing them to overshop, overconsume, even like just overkeep, like feel this kind of scarcity around not wanting to part with things. And I actually went back to school to become a certified life coach, because I really wanted to help people untangle the mental
Mm.
clutter that led to the physical clutter. And a lot of what I've seen people confronting are deeper issues like anxiety, depression, grief and loss that hasn't been processed. Even something like boredom leads people to shop unnecessarily, like being bored or restless or feeling stagnant in their lives and looking for that dopamine hit,
Yeah.
which easily can come in the form of shopping, right? Like just add to cart, it couldn't be easier. And we live during a time where you don't have to get dressed and get in your car and drive and park to shop. You can shop from the comfort of your couch with the push of a button and get that dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And so much of my work now is helping people untangle, why are they really shopping? What is that anxiety or that gap that they're trying to fill? And for many people, it's a sense of lack or longing in their lives that they're trying to put a Band-Aid on. And when you can really slow down and stop shopping, that's when you can get to the root cause of the issue and actually make deeper changes.
So your new book, Lifestyled, is coming out soon.
Yeah.
Can you give us a preview of how it differs from your previous work and what new insights it offers?
Yeah, I'd love to. So my first book, Minimalista, basically details my entire process and toolkit for editing, organizing, and styling your home.
Okay.
The moment that I had with my publishers was, what if you applied these same principles and tools to your life? And so my new book, Lifestyled, details how to apply principles of minimalism and organization to every part of your life, including things like your relationships, your finances, your health, your career. What if you look at it from that same lens of, where is the clutter? Where is the value? What do I need to automate to simplify my life? What do I need to get rid of to reduce distraction? And I took myself through this process, kind of a life reset, after I had, culled through my home and really gotten my home to a place that felt good. I realized my life was overstuffed and cluttered. And I was doing too many things. I was taking on too many commitments. I wanted fewer, better of everything, including relationships, including opportunities for my career. And so a few quick examples are just like, deciding I'm going to write one book a year, but when I'm writing a book, I'm not then doing a podcast or taking on a million new clients or opportunities or launching a product line. I am just focusing in on that one bucket for my career. And that kind of simplifying and distilling to what is the most important thing,
right,
I have found to be so valuable across, all areas of my life.
Yeah. And I'm curious how you approach it, because, as you shared earlier, you're a mom, it looks like you're a homeowner potentially. So there's like a million things that you have to do on the day to day.
Yeah.
And so when you're writing that one book per year, like, how much time are you carving out for it? Or how do you think about like balancing that, like, one most important project with like, I forget the words. I heard this recently. Like, it sometimes feels like you're the janitor of a mountain of bullshit in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So absolutely. So, right. I am a full-time working mom with a business, and I'm an author, and I have a husband, and I have a dog, and I have to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And so I'm right there swimming in the muck with everybody else. And what I have found is it really is a volume issue that all of us are facing in just too muchness and overstuffed lives and homes and minds. So I go through a process, which I do detail in the book, called the life audit, where you kind of take a step back and look holistically at all of the areas in your life. And you assess, like, where am I fulfilled? Where am I wanting to really invest? Where am I wanting to divest? And my rule is, you can really only go big in one thing at a time. So, for example, when I was a new mom and I had a baby, I wasn't writing a book that year. I was keeping a baby alive. That was my one thing. And everything else, I call it, like, goes to like a baseline minimum. So you still have to pay your bills. You still have to get food on the table. You're not neglecting the rest of your life, but you're setting it down to a baseline minimum that you can live with. Yeah. And you're not pushing or, trying to level up while you put the majority of your energy onto that one big thing, whether it's bringing a new baby into the world or writing a book, or maybe it's like a personal goal, like a weight loss or fitness goal, that becomes kind of the center of where you're going to constrain your energy and attention. And you define for yourself, what is the baseline for everything else that I can live with? And it's a lot of saying no. So when I'm a highly productive, active person, people ask me, like, how do you do it all? And the answer is, I don't. I say no to so many things. I turn down opportunities every day. I turn down things that sound perfectly fun, like going on this podcast or that podcast or doing a brand collaboration, because I know my bigger focus. So that's kind of the minimalist mindset, I would say. And then in this book, I also apply, this organizing toolkit, which is, how do you kind of optimize using organization in your life? Like, can you batch all of your errands for one get it done day instead of constantly feeling like you're doing errands every single day all the time? Can you schedule all of your medical appointments and dental appointments like on one day instead of feeling like it's constantly leaking into everything? So I look at, like, how can you set up these automated systems in your life that then create more time and spaciousness?
How do you deal with the disappointment? Well, first of all, I was going to say, thank you for being on my podcast after hearing you talk about that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But like,
absolutely. You made the cut.
as like a bit of a pleaser, I feel like I would have trouble saying, like, my tendency is to want to say yes to please other people. And I'm curious, like, did you deal with that in this kind of shift to saying no to so much? And if so, like, what is your advice?
Yeah. So I am sorry, my dog is barking. Okay. Give me 1 second.
I noticed.
You're okay. Yeah, I'm sure you did. I don't know if you edit this, but real life right here.
Yeah.
So the question was basically around, like, if you are a people pleaser, how do you say no? How do you make those cuts? And the answer is practice. And I include in this new book many, many scripts for dealing with difficult situations.
Nice.
Things like saying no to, can you help out at the kids' school when your plate is already full? But like, of course, it's the nice thing to do. Or saying no even to things like well-meaning neighbors who want to give you hand-me-downs, but you know your home is at capacity. So I have developed kind of my own scripts, which I share in the book. But I think, like, the short answer is, by modeling your own boundaries and by respecting your own limits, you're actually giving a gift to other people, because this is something that everybody struggles with. And we're in such a yes, more is better culture that I've convinced myself, by being a model of having limits and boundaries, I'm actually giving other people permission, or maybe a little dose of inspiration to do the same for themselves. And so the main way that I say no is by saying something complimentary about the opportunity or the ask of the other person, like, that's so generous of you, or I love that you're asking me and I'm so grateful. And I'm at such full capacity in my life, I would be doing a disservice to myself and to you if I said yes. So it's modeling, like, respecting your own boundaries and limits while still being very lovely and complimentary and gracious about whatever that thing is. And I have found, on the whole, people have been so lovely and understanding, and have even said, like, wow, I've never had anyone say that to me. And, like, I really appreciate the honesty that you are at capacity. And instead of, especially for women, we're so groomed to just say yes to everything and everyone, that I think by being able to say something like, I am at capacity right now, or like, my life is so overstuffed with responsibilities that if I said yes, I know I wouldn't be able to deliver in a way that would actually help you. Then it's kind of a win for everybody.
Yeah.
And you're being honest, like, we can't do it all. It's impossible. So there have to be some tough cuts along the way.
I want to zoom in on the organizing toolkit a little bit, because I know that we have listeners out there who are either in the midst of transitioning from a larger home to a tiny house, or they're starting to prepare to do that. So what are your kind of guidelines for decluttering and organizing? And in which order do those happen, or do they happen together?
Yeah, I love that question. The order is really important here. So I have kind of a 4-step process where the first step is just clarity, finding your clarity of why. Why am I organizing? Why am I decluttering? You want to get a really clear motivating reason to kind of propel you forward. So that could be, something like, I want to save a bunch of money for retirement, or I'm sick of managing so many things. I want to create more ease and freedom in my life. Whatever the thing is, write it down, like put it on your refrigerator, have that reason be crystal clear so that when you do get stuck, you have kind of a touchstone to come back to be like, right, this is why I'm doing this. Step 2 is the editing, decluttering step. And that always comes before organizing. The reason being that organized clutter is still clutter, right? So you want to declutter, you want to let go, you want to decrease your volume before you think about organizing. And a few things I do to make this easier for people. So I find that when people get really excited about organizing a whole home, they kind of zip around from room to room and they get overwhelmed and they don't really accomplish anything. They don't see the result. So I always say, rank the rooms or the spaces in your home in order of priority. And within each one, so say you're like, I have this whole home. Okay, I'm just going to start at the front door and I'm going to do my entry. And I'm not going to focus on anything else until my entry is decluttered and organized and set up. Now I'm going to go to whatever's number 2 on my list, whether that's, living room, dining room, etc. So one big space at a time. And within that, I would encourage people to tackle one micro space at a time. So one drawer, one surface, one shelf. And then if you feel the momentum and you want to keep going, you keep going. But this way, you're never unearthing an entire room onto the floor, getting tired, having to pick up a kid, having to run to an appointment. And now you feel like you're in a bigger mess than you started. So when I'm working with clients, I kind of call it the sweep method. I'll start in one corner of a room and we'll literally just go working our way around until we've touched everything in the room, kind of sweeping around. But if we need to stop for lunch, we've decluttered 1/3 of the space. That looks great. And then we have the rest to go, but it's not chaos. The one other tip I would say that really people get hung up on is identify your easiest, best donation drop-offs. So often people will get really stuck on, I made the decisions, I did the decluttering, but now I just have bags everywhere. I don't know what to do with them. I don't know where to go. So before you start your decluttering process, carve out 20 minutes, Google donation drop-offs near me, look for those hard to donate things like textile recycling or e-waste. I always like to just have my local spots identified. So then once I've decluttered, instead of having those piles by the front door, you have a plan. So that can really get things moving out the door.
Nice. Those are great tips. I like that you have a real system and process. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I guess I skipped the final 2 are, so you clarify, then you edit, declutter, then you organize. So once you've decluttered, now you can start thinking about those things like what goes together and makes sense together and where does it make sense in my home?
Yeah.
So I always say organizing is really as simple as grouping similar things together and giving each category a home. That's it. And then my 4th step, which is kind of the fun step, I call elevate. And that's where many of my clients want to start, is like, can we go buy the matching hangers and the beautiful bins and baskets? And I leave that intentionally for the last thing so that you're really taking an inventory once you've decluttered and organized. What do I actually need? Can I repurpose bins or baskets I already own? Did I get rid of enough clothes that now I actually have enough matching hangers? Often you don't have to buy as much as you might think at the beginning of the process.
They want to go shopping. That's what
Everyone wants to go shopping.
They just want to go shopping.
More and more shopping. I know. Yeah. So save that for the very end and do it only if you feel like it will actually add value.
In your experience, what are the most common organizational challenges that people face when living in smaller spaces? And how do you suggest overcoming them?
Yeah, I think it's zones can be really tough in very tiny spaces, especially in a hardworking space like a kitchen or an entryway where often, people in tiny homes, they don't have an entry closet or a mudroom. You're just walking right into your living space. So how do you set up zones where there really is limited space? I can say I have some of those challenges in my own home. While I'm not sure it qualifies as tiny, I do live in a 1,200 square foot home with 2 teenagers, a husband, a dog, and our home is over 100 years old. So
no closets.
While it's very charming, no closets, no garage, no attic, we've got very limited storage. So we've had to sort of hack lots of creative systems. So one example I can give is, you open our front door, you're in our living room, but where does the dog leash go? Where do the dirty shoes go? Where do the backpacks go? So we had this tiny sliver of wall space by our front door. And I brought in a carpenter and kind of designed on a piece of paper a little entry locker that can have doors that close since it's in our living room. And it really is tiny. I'm looking at it right now. It's maybe 3 feet wide by 1 foot deep, but it has been a game changer for our family. And inside are hooks for backpacks and coats and hats and the dog leash and a few cubbies to just toss the dirty shoes as they come in. So it's still tight. We still have to really reckon with the volume, but now we're not staring at all that stuff and we have a system that makes sense. So I would say it's look for like, where are the slivers of space in your home where maybe you can add some concealed storage. There's kind of a display and conceal rule as an organizer. We want to display the pretty things like coffee table books or even like, serving bowls or vases that are lovely to look at. We want to conceal things like, I don't know, the tools, the batteries, the light bulbs, the dog food. And in a tiny space, it can be really hard to figure that out. But finding ways of having doors that close, repurposing things like credenzas or adding a door wherever you can add a door, like to built-in cabinets, things like that, so that you have places where you can conceal those utilitarian items.
Well, for our listeners who are feeling maybe overwhelmed by their clutter or by organizing and, maybe they've read a book and they want to go further and get more help, what do you suggest looking for? Well, first of all, are you taking clients currently? And then what do you suggest people look for in a organizer?
In an organizer? Yeah. So I take a really limited number of clients per year, but I love my work. So if you are interested in working with me, feel free to email me. I would say in terms of what to look for, there are so many, like I interviewed, 25 of thousands, and there are organizers that specialize in everything from ADHD, so clients who are struggling with attention and focus, to kind of specialized areas like paper clutter, or like I interviewed one organizer who just does kitchen and pantry setups. So I would say start with thinking about where are the places where you feel like you've kind of hit your stride and you're good at, and where are the blocks for you? And then look for an organizer who specializes in that. So for me, like I specialize in coaching people through the process of decluttering. That's really my sweet spot. And I focus on helping people be really responsible and sustainable in how they dispose of things, and then elevating because I'm really interested in design and style. There are other organizers that are brilliant with like systems and small space hacks and, installation. Like that's something I don't do. I will not put holes in anybody's walls. I'm not qualified to do that. But I know many of my colleagues will think of like, oh, we could store the bike here and let's mount a system. So Like if that's something you're looking for, those are the kinds of questions I would ask.
Okay.
Like, do you install things? I also like there are some organizers who work only with the client one-on-one, like myself, where there is a lot of teaching and coaching,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a very kind of interactive process. And then there are organizers who come in with a team and will just organize and systematize and label what you have without really doing the coaching or the decluttering. So maybe there's somebody listening who's like, well, I've done the decluttering. I'm really good at that, but I have a hard time with zoning and systems, and I want someone's eye on that. So those are the kind of questions to ask, like, what's your process like? How do you work? Do you organize with me or without me? Do you install things or make recommendations for systems? And really, there is an organizer for every type of challenge right now. There's never been a better time to get organized with support. And people can also search the NAPO directory if they are in the US, where you can search by type and location.
And what's NAPO?
NAPO is the National Association for Professional Organizers. So that's a directory that's free online where you can put in things like, you know, your city, what your challenge is, and you can find kind of vetted people.
And is there like a professional certification for organizers?
You know, it's an unregimented business. And so while there are some certifications out there, it's anyone can be an organizer. I personally started my business before anyone had even heard of professional organizing, and there was no training. I had no frame of reference. It was just something I had always been skilled at and loved helping people with. So I would say like that's less of a thing that you need to vet is training.
Okay.
And it's more, is this person the right fit for me? Do I like their energy? Do I feel like I trust them in my home? You know, it's a very intimate process, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I know that over the last 10 years or so, since I've been in the tiny house world, the conversation around tiny houses has changed and grown. So I'm curious, you know, how do you think the conversation around minimalism and organized living has evolved in recent years?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, my first book was called Minimalista, and when I was marketing it, I would really have people recoil at minimalism. The concept of minimalism was scary to people and off-putting. And I think I and many other people have done a lot of work in educating people around what minimalism really is about, which is about intentional living and not about restriction. So I think there have been some gains. I feel proud that I'm a part of that. Like people have read my books and said, oh, wow, like I have a really new sense of what minimalism or small space living is. Like I see now it's less about restriction and more about freedom, which is my primary message. I think there's still a long way to go. I feel that the messages that we have, you know, through social media and online and even in our neighborhoods is still primarily about consumption and bigger is better. But I think there is a very small, powerful group of people who are going against the grain and deciding to intentionally downsize or live smaller that I think are really inspiring other people. And I do see movement. I still think we have a long way to go. Absolutely.
Well, one question that I like to ask all my guests is what are 2 or 3 resources that you recommend? And I guess for you, Shira, I'm curious if you have any favorite minimalism or organization books that are not your own. Any thinkers in the space that you really like?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I read a lot of personal development books, and I love the book Essentialism that, you know, was a huge bestseller, but really applies to business, life, and home, and is about, you know, finding what's essential to you, and really is like a brilliant book about how to think like a minimalist.
Yeah.
I also really love the book, The Compound Effect, which again is not an organizing book per se, but is a book that is about how small, smart, action leads to major transformation and change.
Mm,
It's a book I go back to again and again. I probably read it once a year.
wow.
I found it incredibly inspiring. And I think, one of the biggest obstacles for people wanting to declutter or downsize or get organized is overwhelm. And so I think thinking about just making small, smart decisions every day, I call it a 15-minute win. So
Yeah.
if you can have one 15-minute win a day, think about where you'll be in just a few months. And then where will you be in a few years if you are even just every day, like going through your junk mail, throwing your laundry in and not waiting for it to pile up, putting a donation bag by your front door and tossing one thing in it every day.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to make huge transformation without the overwhelm or feeling like you have to take 2 weeks off work. So those are resources I love. I also love stopwaste.org, where you can find out sustainable ways to donate everything from like paint and hazardous waste to old textiles. Great resource for people who really want to downsize and do it in an eco-conscious way.
Awesome. Well, Shira Gill, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. It was really great to meet you. And you shared so many helpful things, and it was really inspiring to talk.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a fun conversation.
Thank you so much to Shira Gill for being a guest on the show today. You can find the show notes for this episode, including a complete transcript and links and resources at thetinyhouse.net/310. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/310. Don't forget to go check out Shira's new book. I have a copy and have been really enjoying reading through it. It's awesome. So do check that out. And if you enjoyed today's episode or found it helpful, please make sure to follow the show and share it with anyone who you think might benefit. Your support helps us continue to bring valuable content to listeners like you. Well, that's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.